think that's probably about as close as I'm going to get it actually with the raw values. So I think that's definitely now, if I just come out of here, I'm definitely getting now in the vector scope, there's that much closer alignment in terms of the saturation and the brightness of the image. And if I flick back and forth, where the lighting is considerably different, and I think that's something I'm going to have to spend some time fixing. But the colours are ballpark, the saturation is ballpark the same now. The contrast, I think we need to come down a little more. But I need to do that in the bottom half of the screen, because the top half, the roof, is where you're noticing that there's the biggest discrepancy in the change of light. So this is where I'm going to have to move now into the sort of the secondary world. In terms of a primary correction, or in fact this is before a primary, this is a one light because we're doing it on the raw, that has enabled me to get really close, completely non-destructively, which is great. So I can now start to be a bit more targeted with the rest of this. So the stills gallery is incredibly useful for bringing up these image wipes, they call them in Resolve. So we're literally changing the point. I don't think I actually did that. Let me just show you. So if I double click, I can change the point where they wipe. So as an overview, this is quite useful, but if I wanted to quickly just match her, I can come along here. And I think I'm ready now to sort of delve into the normal kind of primary and secondary tools to start more accurately placing my contrast and more accurately matching these shots essentially. So I'm going to create a new node for myself to work in. I'm just going to come into the curves and I'm just going to try and bring down the contrast to match a bit better here. In fact, that's probably too much. Up there. Let's come up here and let's try and find an area. So what's really useful I find with this is just to click and use the qualifier to click. So if we click on that part of the frame, it places control points along the YRGB curves that correspond to where I've just clicked. So I can manipulate this a little bit more closely. So I want that to kind of match. Probably around about there, I suspect. And let's pull this back because there's a little bit of a knock on. So let's go back to our image wipe. Yeah, that ceiling's much better. That's actually pretty good. I think we only need to tweak that a little bit. Now let's come over here to this side of the room. So clearly we can see we're drifting off as we go through. It's good, it's good, it's good, and then it goes off. There's actually a light just kind of coming in here. I need to kind of investigate what that is at a later date. We're also kind of starting to obliterate the green screen here. So if I click on that, and I can start to move this range of brightness in, and let's come in to our primary bars and let's just knock some of that green out there and some of the blue. So we're slowly kind of bringing these two shots into the same world. I reckon we're actually going to have to do a fair amount of work on this one. I'm going to actually change my orientation, so I'm going to split this the other way and bring this up so I can just see how that varies. I'm going to create a new node and I'm going to create a graduated mask. Let's turn this off. Try and deal with this huge variation in the lighting along the top here. It kind of runs along there. So I reckon if we increase our contrast, yeah, you can see that bringing down that side to match. Let's bring up our image wipe again. Let's just darken these mids. We're getting pretty close. Now the saturation, as we're adjusting, these are RGB contrast adjustments. So at the moment my saturation is increasing at the same time. If I undo that and undo that and come into my primary bars and do the same thing, then I will be able to match the contrast without the saturation going all over the place, which is good. Let's bring that up to about there. Just increase the contrast a touch. Just a little bit. reckon that is definitely helping a great deal. Let's just turn that on and off. You can see that's just wiping across the frame now if we turn that on and off. So this was our original shot. We're now grading it down on that side, and if we split screen that with the other shot that we're trying to match it to, they're definitely on the way to appearing. It's quite, I see it's a lot darker over this side. I think what we'll do is we'll actually do the exact opposite of what we've got here. Now, a good way to do that is to create what's known as an outside node. If you're ever doing something with a node where you have transparency, so essentially what's known as an alpha channel. So with this, we had a graduated transparency. So there's part of the frame that's not being affected and part that is. And now I want to do the exact opposite, so I can add a little bit more darkness in this side. Rather than me recreating that, I can simply add an outside node, which just creates a new node and then inverts the alpha channel so that you're doing the exact opposite. So if I add an outside node over here, and I'm just going to bring this down, and I think we want a little bit more saturation, so I'll do this with the RGB. And yeah, that's much closer. That's made a huge difference actually. Saturation's a bit high this side, so let's desaturate this. In fact, it's now very close to yeah. If we just move between these two shots, we need there's a little touch of extra contrast through the middle there. So the last thing we need to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of a down curve here. You're not going to want to sit there and watch me pull this entire image to pieces. Actually, I wish I hadn't have picked this shot. It really is genuinely quite difficult because they have moved the lights. You can see the light sources have moved within the scene, and that is causing quite big differences along the top there. So this is going to be one of those ones where it sort of sleeves up and lots and lots of masking to try and match individual elements of the scene that we're seeing, and that involves a lot of tracking. So we'll move on. But suffice to say that we are definitely in the general kind of area now. If we look at these two shots before and after, we're starting to kind of certainly match up that contrast, and the color is quite important. If we look in the vector scope between these two shots, you can see we're really a lot closer. There's some crucial differences with the color of the green screen, which we might need to tidy up, but this is why you tend to do this grade after the visual effects. But I reckon that we're heading in the right direction. Now, if we go to the last shot, we need to head back to our raw settings again. We're going to open up the clip settings so that we can get access to what we need again. And one more time, going to come in and open up the exposure, bring this right up, knock the saturation back, and try and lift up those shadows just a touch as well, just to match them a little bit better. Not going to do much. Let's set our color temperature to 5000 again. That'll do. Let's now move into our primary controls, and we can start to do our split screen. Let's take the previous shot again and load it up. So let's take our image wipe again and just bring these two things up, and we'll just check it on the reference monitor. And this one's much, much easier to match than that previous shot because A, we're already in the right place, but also we can't see the roof of the caravan that they're in this time. So we've got a lot more to work with and less kind of problem areas here. But if we're looking again at our split of brightness, I think we can definitely see that we're a little, actually they're very close, surprisingly close. I think we're definitely a little light, so let's just bring our shadows around a little bit. And saturation looks good. Actually, the general tone, maybe the saturation is a little, it's come down a tiny bit. Now this is really good, and again we can look, if we look at the colour of his top, and here, her top is very similar. So the image wipe is incredibly useful for us to do that side-by-side comparison, but there's also the split screen mode. Now in split screen mode, that allows me to actually just see the whole frame, and I love the fact that with this particular feature, you can actually say, well, let's see everything in the current group, which is what I'm going to do now, but you can also just say just selected clips, you can say its neighbors, you can say the current clip, but with all the versions of it that currently exist within that clip. So you can essentially kind of audition different versions of a clip grade. That works really well with clients as well when you're sat trying to show them different ideas and different things that you're trying out. But here I'm just going to say current group, and it's just going to show me, if I go full screen, it's going to show me each different shot from this current group. And I can still use my tools. So I can still go through next clip and previous clip. I can still go through disabling grades and seeing what effect that's having on the overall image. I can bypass them all. So you can see that the work that we're doing is pulling them in, and they're slowly kind of being brought back on track so that there is a continuity there that will hopefully prevent our viewer from becoming distracted about things like the roof of the caravan kind of going lighter and darker and lighter and darker, or particularly our characters, you know, their clothing. I'm absolutely certain now that her jumper is exactly the same colour and brightness in every single shot here, which is great. And his jumper is very, very close. It's really just the wood panelling on the caravan that I think needs more work, and that's really where windowing is going to be probably quite tricky with this one. So I'm not going to delve into that right now with you sitting here watching me. Let's put the image back to being full screen. Let's turn off our split screen. Split screen, incredibly useful. It's also even more useful, not just for groups, but when you're actually getting quite near the end and you want to look at whole blocks of scenes, or even if it's a short film, the entire short film. I love doing that, just looking at the whole thing and, you know, bypassing it, and you'll see the continuity going all over the place, and then you put everything back on and you just see everything tighten up. And it's a great way of getting a fantastic overview of your whole project just in thumbnail form. And I also often take screen grabs of that and just show them to clients if we're doing remote grades, just to give them a kind of a confidence that, you know, this continuity is there and their look is embedded, because it's very easy, as I say, when everything's side by side like that, it's very easy to glance over it and say, that's all the same. I can see my look there. I can see, you know, the aesthetic has developed across the whole project. So generally speaking, that split screen feature I think is worth its weight in gold, particularly for this type of work. If I come out of this current group, I'm just going to go into my character A group. So these are these shots here. And let's just say that I want to just check that this part of the wood paneling within the caravan just over his right shoulder is consistent as we go through. I'm going to create a key by just clicking the cabinet behind him, going into highlight mode. I'm just going to click a few times and try, I mean, there's quite, yeah, it's a really solid key just by clicking there. Let's bring up the vector scope. We can see a very strong bias up towards this kind of warm orange, and we can run through and we can essentially do the same thing in each of these and then just move through the clips. So if we go through the clips, you can actually see on the vector scope, let's punch that up full screen, very, very similar. It's not perfect, but it's very, very similar as we're working through. So actually it's grabbing a lot of his skin as well. That in itself will be a problem. That's one of the secondaries I'll try and do, is to actually bring the saturation down in the wood paneling so that there's more depth, because at the moment the actual saturation and luminance of the wood paneling with his skin is very, very similar. So that's actually helped me identify something I'll have to work on later on. But that would be sort of something that I'll do once the basic continuity is done. But the underlying saturation of these shots is actually pretty much there. Now that last shot is a bit low, so I'm going to just boost that up. And also that last one is probably a little round. I'm just going to use the hue rotation. I think hue rotation is great when you're making selections like this, as long as you feather them off. I'm just going to rotate just ever so, if I rotate too much, you get crazy things going on. But if I just rotate ever so slightly for this, and that first one actually needs to come around a bit as well. you know, you could draw like a line of best fit straight through the middle of this trace, and on each clip it'd be in an identical place. So I'm really confident now that the color and saturation of this clip is spot on. Let's look at the waveform, and let's have a little look at the tonality of this and see if it matches. This is a little more tricky, but I think, yeah, that middle shot is a little brighter. I feel like the others are too dark, so if one of them's brighter, I'll match the darker ones to it. It's very close anyway, but I'm going to take this first shot, and I'm actually just going to lighten it up ever so slightly. And I'm going to take this last shot and do the same just slightly. And that key was only kind of really to, essentially by highlighting it, to hide everything else. That was just to allow me to spot it clearly in the scopes. I don't actually want this key to apply. So by simply clicking the reset button for the qualifier, that clears that out, but maintains the work I've just done with the grade, applying it to the whole image. And again, let's go into our split screen. Let's go into our current group, and we'll full screen it just so you can see. And you know, this is really good. What's nice about this is I've not had to do very much work at all. So clearly, you know, there weren't major upsets in terms of lighting this scene. They didn't have to probably have, you know, lunch in between different takes or something. My guess is that they pretty much rattled through this quite quickly because it's very consistent in camera, which is great because as you saw in that previous example with the wides, there was quite a big variation in the lighting and the setup of the scene. So that's going to take a lot more work, but it's work that needs to be done. I don't want you to think that, you know, once you go away, I'll just be like, oh, let's forget that. That's too much effort. Unfortunately, it will need to be done. And it's going to be grading this in the next couple of weeks. So I look forward to that. But I know that it's going to serve the narrative and it's going to make sure that this short film is a lot more effective than it would have been otherwise. And it's worth spending that time doing. So now I've got my character A done and I've got my wide done. Now it's time to compare those two together. Let's go back to all clips and let's load up this shot. Let's go in here. It's quite close. Let's just full screen this for a moment. And you can see now I can actually see side by side. And what becomes immediately obvious to me is that there's a lot more detail in the shadows in the first clip. The only thing I didn't really like about this wide is that it's too bright for me. You know, I'm guessing, and I'll confer with the director, and if the DP's sitting with me, then even better, but I suspect this is a much more representative frame of the look that they're trying to go for with this scene. Also, to my eye, I just think it looks a lot better like this than it does in that kind of lighter scene. So that tells me then that what I need to do is take down the overall level of illumination on the wide to match this shot here, this single. What's quite useful is I can apply my grades to individual clips, but I can also, by coming into this menu here, apply grades that affect the group that clips are in. So it's a whole new node structure. You can see the outside color kind of changes. We go from a group pre-clip, which is changes you can make to a group of clips before you start grading them individually. We've got the clip grades, which have this orange boundary around them. We've got post-clip grades here, which go yellow, and we've got the timeline grade, which has a blue bar around it when you use those. If I come into my group post clip, with this split screen up, so let's come and let's take a still from this. Let's come back to, no, let's stay in there. Let's come back in here. Grouped two shot, and let's just select this. So with my group post-clip node selected and a image wipe happening between my single and my two shot, I've got his skin right next to each other so I can clearly see. I'm just going to brighten up the skin, and what I can see is that actually I've got far too much detail here. Let's just keep pushing those apart. It's much more contrasty there. You might think, oh, you've just got this all right, now you're ruining it all. Because I'm doing this on a node that's applying to the whole group, and I've already made the group consistent with itself, I'm doing a single change that's affecting 3 clips simultaneously by the same amount, starting from a known consistent base. So in essence, I can do this without fear of it going completely wrong. And even if there are slight things that it introduces, I'll go back through individually and just make small changes at the clip level again. But it's kind of push and pull, and you're just wiggling it in until it's kind of heading exactly where you want it to. The other thing I think I'll do is it's a little bit magenta in this 2 shot. So I'm going to come into my color wheels, and I'm just going to try and pull out some of that magenta of the midtones. And that is pretty damn close. So his face is looking quite good, and the overall kind of contrast is good. So now's the real test, because I've done the underlying continuity from the 2 shot, now from his single. In theory, I'd then go and do her single as well, but just to speed this process up, I've now got those shots in isolation as the back and forth. So this is now back into the editorial cut. I'm going to go into a split screen with this and go full screen. And in theory, as I play through this now, I should see, as I said, there is definitely work to do to the wood paneling in those wide shots at the top there. But there is definitely now, let's just bypass everything. You can see as the shots that we've had major changes to, in each case, each one is now shifting. So the single is brightening up his skin tones, knocking back the saturation. The 2 shot, particularly one of the 2 shots, which was very bright, is coming down, matching the level. The other one's coming up, matching that kind of starting point. So hopefully you can see the process as we've worked through by starting with our 2 shot, so we can see both of them, then identifying the 2 shot that was the closest to the final look and making the others match that, then taking screenshots of that, or stills as Resolve calls them, to make sure that that's consistent between those 3, then comparing that to his single, character A's single, then coming back and adding a post clip to make both of those things match together, and looking at them as a split screen on the whole here shows me that, given that I'm kind of slightly rushing through this for your benefit, I'm still very happy that this is very, very close to looking coherent. People should now be able to sit through this scene, watching it and concentrating on the dialogue, focusing on the story and not thinking, why is his face brighter now than it was a second ago, and what's just happened in the background? It's got lighter or darker, and continuity is tricky. I'll not lie to you. It really takes an awful lot of focus and back and forth, using the scopes, using your reference monitor. I don't know any client that doesn't appreciate a good, strong continuity and consistency of appearance of their characters or their product across multiple shots or scenes or in an entire film. Yes, it's the most difficult part of color grading and it's the most time-consuming part, but for me it's also the most rewarding part. So now a word of warning. As you've seen, chasing continuity is time-consuming. There's a lot you need to do to make sure that shots match scene by scene as you work your way through. But there is an extra layer of complexity to this, which is frustrating and can be easily missed. And that's all to do with sort of functions of our vision, really. So they're things that you can't escape. You just need to be mindful of them and make sure you put things into practice to cope with them. Number 1 being having a calibrated reference monitor. Number 2 being a keen ability to interpret scopes and read and place objects on scopes. Those things are just so fundamental to this. But there is this thing that comes down to biology, which is called simultaneous contrast. Now, simultaneous contrast is a function of vision where colors that surround a color change how that color appears. You can imagine that when you're talking about continuity, this can really trip you up, particularly as I've already shown you. You can key out certain bits and isolate them and say, yes, that's where they fall in the scopes, or that's where that falls in the scopes, or draw a little circular window. There's ways that you can isolate sections and then compare them and split screens. It's all kind of by the numbers. It's a bit technical, and it works 99% of the time, except for those moments where your eyes come along and just ruin everything. So simultaneous contrast means that this guy's skin, for example, our character A, I'm happy that it's completely consistent across these 3 shots that he's in. But in a later shot, he may move to another part of the caravan where a different color or contrast is now behind his face. And that may, I haven't actually gone through and checked with this one, but that might alter it to the point where he looks like his skin tones have changed color, but they are actually exactly the same. This honestly is probably as annoying as it's sounding right now. It can really trip you up. So I've had situations where there are shots that you are sure they must be right, but you look at your reference monitor and in your gut you just know that this doesn't look right. So you might find yourself having to deliberately make something technically wrong to make it perceptually correct. And that's annoying. That's not fun, but it does have to be done sometimes. So don't be a slave to the numbers, really, is what I'm saying. Make sure that you're checking these things to make sure they're consistent, but look at a calibrated reference monitor, and if it looks like simultaneous contrast is at play and something that you know is right based on the scopes and just looks wrong and your gut instinct is it feels wrong, make it look technically wrong so that perceptually when you look at it, it looks right. And then your viewer won't notice it either because they will suffer from the same effects of simultaneous contrast as you are. So it's worth spending the time and being aware of that as you work.
The idea for the storm came from a real event that happened to us when we were filming something completely different in London. One day, it was in the summer of 2017 when in the middle of the day in London, about 2 p.m., we were lighting a daytime scene and we had bay windows. We were expecting the sun to be there to light our scene for us. But then suddenly the sky turned black, the sun disappeared, and it was, it turned out it was sand whipped up from the Sahara Desert, was carried across the ocean and just turned day into night. And it was just a really strange moment just to see people just trying to, just sort of taking this in. That weather phenomenon was what really sort of inspired us sort of look for the storm. I like the idea of using light that's diffused through this like wall of sand. So sand has this can have this kind of orangey color, and to have this kind of, daylight being diffused by that in this small claustrophobic space just felt really nice. This kind of, one strong orangey kind of alien-like color, low contrast feel. Just felt like it's enough to kind of weird out the characters in the scenes in really interesting ways.
The way that the cells in our eyes, in our cones, are discerning specific wavelengths of light is that they have a pigment in them. There's a substance in them that's essentially filtering out certain frequencies of light so that they're receptive to specific short, medium or long wavelengths. But those pigments can become fatigued and essentially wear out for a short period of time until they recover if you constantly bombard them with a set, constant frequency of light. One of the ways that I always kind of use to describe this is something that I noticed as a kid and growing up is if you're ever sort of just lying in the sunshine, if you think back when you were a kid lying in the garden and eyes closed and the sun's coming through your eyelids, your blood in the capillaries in your eyelids will be making the light that's actually hitting your retina very red. And if you do that for long enough, so if you're sunbathing, for example, and then you open your eyes, the whole world around you suddenly looks very cyan. This weakening of the photoreceptors through overstimulation will actually cause, once that stimulation goes, your vision to be dominated by the complementary color. So in my example where the sun is coming through your eyelids and your retina are flooded with a red light, when you open your eyes, red sits opposite cyan on the color wheel. So because you've got a weakening in this channel, it tips over the other way, so everything looks very kind of cyany, and all the foliage around you kind of looks kind of weirdly green, and then slowly your photoreceptors in that kind of long wavelength where the reds live kind of recover, and everything sort of balances out again. This actually tripped me up when we color graded the Directing Color series that we did previously for MZ, because there was a series of shots, of interview shots of me, and the very last time it cuts back to me, the previous shot is a shot of sunlight filtering in through some leaves. So it's a very green shot, very bright green. It's on screen for about 5 or 6 seconds. And actually it's so strong that when it cuts back to the next shot, there's just enough weakening of your cones that the next interview, even though it's technically identical to the previous shots, looks really magenta because green sits opposite magenta. So you've got a weakening of green, so it's tipped too far over towards magenta. And it annoyed me for a little while before I realized that, by checking with the scopes, no, this really is still the same as the other ones. Nothing's happened. I thought maybe I'd done something stupid and lent on a keyboard or something. But it was just simply that previous shot was just altering the after image, the following shot. So that was a case, as I say, of just grading it to be wrong, more green than it actually was, so that it balanced out and you became essentially the same as the previous shots. It sounds crazy, it is crazy, but that's biology for you, and that's something we've got to deal with. So those things are really worth considering, I think, when you're color grading for continuity. That being said, continuity, as I say, I think it's the backbone of color grading. It's I think a very pleasurable experience. It's methodical, and once you get through it, you've got real continuity, you've got real consistency, and it's where the story starts to kind of come alive, and it really opens up the floodgates for the kind of the next stages when you're starting to en masse push creative looks into your scenes and your groups of shots and start to kind of really embed any kind of color look that you might be going for, and that's where the fun really starts. So you've got to work for it, but you get there in the end.
My worst experience with color is the first season of a documentary series that I DP'd called The Wonder List, and we had the whole discussion that we're going to shoot log and we're going to use all these different cameras. We had A camera was a Sony and B camera was a Canon, and then we had all the middle cameras, drones, and we had GoPros, and everything looked so drastically different as you'd expect. And then when they went into the edits, they dropped the news to me that they didn't have the budget for a colorist. And I was like, really? How on earth are you going to do this? And it was painful to watch, I have to say, when it went out. They did what they could inside Avid by the editor, and I was watching one of the episodes. It was an interview, and then the wide shot looked okay. They cut to a tight shot, and it looked good. Then they cut back to the wide, and for some reason it was magenta. And they cut to the other shot, and it was blue. I was like, oh my God, this is... And if you're a director of photography, you spent so much time making something like this, the color, the time in the edit suite to make it look, even just match it, makes or breaks the image. And it's really depressing if that part of the process, and coloring is essentially one of the most important aspects of your filmmaking. And if you screw it up, then you might as well not bother.
Sometimes scene continuity can seem like a real headache, and there's nothing worse than trying to get things consistent when what was fed to you in the first place was inconsistent. You've seen how I've struggled with one shot there where the lighting was very different between the shots, between the takes. There's only so much a colorist can do. We can't work miracles all the time. There's a surprising amount that we can do, and actually that shot can definitely be fixed given the time. But why waste your colorist's time or your own time if you've shot it working tirelessly to kind of do these things when there are certain things that you can do in camera to just make life really simple? One of the major things I think that really helps continuity is when you've got a multicam shoot or an event shoot where you've got multiple operators, multiple cameras. You could say when you're shooting a training course with 1, 2, 3 cameras. So here we've got Canon C200, we've got FS7 Sony, we've got Sony FS5. And what I've actually done is I've actually taken some of the rushes from either yesterday or this morning, I can't remember when, and I've just brought up 2. So I've just picked 2 for now. So because they're close together, it'll be easier to match them. So we've got the C200 and the FS7. So Canon and Sony Color Science. This will be fun. This is me really putting my money where my mouth is. To help me out here, so that I'm not going to completely flail in the dark right in front of you on camera, I've chosen the chart. So I've got a chart here. Periodically, we're manually white balancing all of our cameras, and I'm revealing the chip side of the chart so that we've got these references, particularly in this case, our contrast references and our saturated primary and secondary references. So I'm going to try now to do what ultimately I'll have to do for this entire training series, which is to match these 2 cameras together. And ultimately I'll also have to match this camera as well. But it will be particularly important that I match these 2 cameras together because they're side by side giving us our loose wide and our tight shots. So this is me doing that for this whole series that you're now watching, but before we've finished. It's like some kind of time loop there going on. But anyway, we're going to do it now, and you can see the process that I use and how simple this process can be if you take the time during production to use things like charts. So I'm using the X-Rite Color Checker video chart. It's the chart I always use. I just think it's a hugely valuable chart to carry around with me everywhere I go, because as I say, it's just there. It's within reach every now and again. And I get eyes rolled at me on production. Sometimes I get DPs questioning why I'm bothering. But I think my results speak for themselves. I think that the quality and consistency of the output of all of our films as a company, and as a colorist that I'm working on, I think that shows you that it is worth taking the time to do that. And it's difficult. You can see stuff that people are doing that looks great, but just remember, by the time you see it on Vimeo on your screen of your mobile phone, and it's had all the noise reduction applied, and it's had the hell graded out of it, you can get away with murder, and some people do. But some people, if they keep kind of peddling that, eventually it's going to trip them up, or they'll have clients noticing it when they're watching it big. And simple tips like this are just going to help you pull that all together and make sure that you're constantly kind of really punching above your weight in terms of your color management. So here it goes, live, matching two cameras together for scene continuity. So I've got my two shots. Let's think, first of all, intelligently about which one's going to need more work. I think just looking straight off the bat, the C200 is more saturated. That's obvious straight away. The FS7